You know, usually when we talk about a musical instrument's history, there is this expectation of a really clear, unbroken lineage.
Right, like a straight line from the past to the present.
Exactly. I mean, the violin has its Paganinis, its Vivaldis, its Tartinis, this really neat chronological passing of the crown. And the cello has its Bach suites standing like these ancient, unshakable monoliths.
Yeah, and the pedagogical path for those instruments is just laid out for you from the very first day you hold a bow.
It is. You walk into the practice room and you know exactly whose ghost you're channeling. It's clean. But then you step into the world of the viola, particularly in the 19th century.
And suddenly that clean historical lineage just completely shatters.
It really does. We are looking at a repertoire landscape that is fraught. It's full of shadows, rumors, and frankly, borrowed identities. And that is exactly why we are here today.
It's a much-needed conversation.
Definitely. So to you, our dedicated listener from the Viol Studio community, whether you are a student currently battling the alto clef, or a teacher trying to find fresh recital repertoire, or even a professional who lives and breathes that dark, chocolatey tone, welcome.
Consider this a cozy chat in the backstage lounge.
Yeah, pull up a chair because today we are going on a mission.
A very critical mission, I'd say. Because, the overarching historical narrative is that the 19th century simply didn't care about the viola.
Right. The myth is that Romantic era composers were just too busy obsessing over the dazzling high-wire acrobatics of the violin or the soaring tenor of the cello to write anything meaningful for us.
Which is just so profoundly untrue.
It is, and we are going to take a sledgehammer to that assumption today. We're diving deep into a truly foundational text, Chapter X from Maurice W. Riley's comprehensive book, The History of the Viola, Volume 1.
Specifically focusing on 19th century literature, which is where things get really interesting.
Exactly. What is our baseline here?
Well, what is fascinating is that if you only look at the surface of 19th century concert programs, yeah, the viola does seem kind of invisible.
Sure, it's not headlining.
Right. But when you examine the actual scores and the private lives of these composers, the viola was secretly the emotional anchor for the era's greatest musical minds.
The tone of the viola, its inherent acoustic melancholia, it just perfectly matched the spirit of Romanticism.
It really did. And today, we are going to explore exactly why this music matters for your modern repertoire. We're getting into the technical specs, the exact physical dimensions of lost instruments, the bitter historical dramas.
Oh, I can't wait for the drama.
And of course, the immense pedagogical value hiding in these scores.
Welcome to Viola Studio. We are a YouTube channel dedicated to the technical, pedagogical, and artistic development of viola students and instrumentalists. In every episode, our goal is to provide a concise and entertaining analysis. We will explore key themes, the messages of the great masters, and the historical context that shaped the sound of our instrument. Whether you are taking your first steps in the alto clef, or you are a professional seeking a new perspective, there is something for everyone at Viola Studio.
Don't miss our upcoming episodes, and remember,
There's always time to explore the history and the heart of classical music.
I want to start by addressing the elephant in the practice room. And if you are a violist, you know exactly what I am talking about.
The borrowed repertoire.
Yeah. You sit down to play a major romantic sonata and you realize, wait a minute, it wasn't originally written for you. It was written for a clarinet or a cello or some totally extinct string instrument.
People historically have compared this to wearing someone else's tailored suit.
But honestly, I think it's more like moving into an architect's house after they abandon it. The bones are incredible, but you still have to figure out where to put your own furniture.
That's a great analogy.
Right. But why are we always, quote unquote, stealing music? Are we just doing it because our own cupboard is bare?
Well, that anxiety about borrowing is so common among violists. But Franz Zeiringer, who was a prominent musicologist who cataloged a massive amount of our repertoire, he actually coined a specific classification for these pieces.
And he didn't call them stolen, right?
No, he didn't call them stolen or even arranged. He called them borrowed. And both Zeiringer and Riley make it very clear that the inclusion of these borrowed works is completely justified.
Historically, aesthetically, and musically.
Exactly. You aren't wearing a poorly fitting suit. You are taking a musical concept that the composers themselves often realized worked better on the deeper, richer resonance of the violist's C string.
So let's look at the ultimate musical architect then, Ludwig van Beethoven. Because when we talk about Beethoven, we usually picture him furiously pounding on a piano, snapping strings.
Right, the wild hair and the temper.
Yeah, we definitely don't picture him holding a viola.
But we absolutely should. To understand Beethoven's writing for our instrument, you have to look at his teenage years.
Which were spent where?
From 1789 to around 1792, young Beethoven was actually employed as a violist in the Bonn Court Orchestra.
Let's just pause there and think about the physical reality of that. You have a teenage Beethoven sitting physically in the center of the orchestra.
Right in the thick of it.
Yeah, he isn't playing the soaring melody on the E string like the first violins, and he isn't hammering out the root bass notes like the cellos. He is sitting in the alto section.
Physically surrounded by the inner voices of the harmony.
Right. He's playing the suspensions, the passing tones, the rhythmic engines that drive the music forward. That absolutely has to change how your brain processes counterpoint.
It fundamentally rewrites your understanding of orchestration.
Yeah.
And the director of that Bonn orchestra was Joseph Reger.
Oh, related to Antonin.
Yes, Joseph's nephew, Antonin Reger, actually played the flute in that exact same group. And Joseph Reger wrote a viola concerto in E-flat major.
Okay, wait, did Beethoven play it?
Well, according to the scholar Michael Goldstein, there is significant evidence suggesting that very concerto might have been written specifically for the young Beethoven to perform.
Wow. And playing a classical concerto on a late 18th century viola was no joke. The instruments were often large, cumbersome, and the bow technology was just barely transitioning into the modern tortobow.
So Beethoven intimately understood the physical labor required to pull a good tone out of the instrument.
Which perfectly brings us to a major piece of his borrowed repertoire, the Notturno in D major for viola and piano, Opus 42.
Yes. So the Notturno is an arrangement of an earlier work of his, the Serenade in D major, Opus 8, which was originally a string trio for violin, viola, and cello.
But there is a massive scholarly debate over this one, right? Over whether Beethoven himself actually made the arrangement for viola and piano.
Huge debate.
I was reading Sidney Beck's prefatory notes in his edition of the Notturno, and he goes deep into the manuscript forensics.
Oh, the handwriting analysis.
Yeah. The handwriting of the arrangement doesn't perfectly match Beethoven's usual chaotic scrawl. The phrasing marks in the piano reduction look a bit too neat.
Which points to a copyist.
Exactly. Perhaps the work of a publisher's copyist, like Franz Aver Kleinheinz, who we know often arranged Beethoven's works. So, if Beethoven didn't write it, why are we claiming it?
Because Beethoven was notoriously protective of his intellectual property. I mean, he frequently issued public cease and desist letters to publishers who released unauthorized arrangements of his music.
Oh, he would absolutely destroy them in the press.
He would. But with the Notturno, Opus 42, he was absolutely aware of its publication in 1804, and he made zero attempt to disown it.
So he essentially gave it his official seal of approval.
Exactly, because the viola part works so flawlessly.
He looked at it and said, yeah, that's exactly how I would have done it.
Right. But if we want to talk about Beethoven's true, unborrowed love for the viola, we really have to look at his chamber music.
Oh, definitely. I actually have the score for the septet in E-flat major, Opus 20, right here. It was written in 1800. And in the third movement, the first variation, he literally just hands the keys to the viola.
It's a great moment.
The violin completely drops out, and the viola takes the entire melodic line.
And we have to remember, that was a radical shift in hierarchy for the time. Before Beethoven, the viola was largely treated as harmonic filler, you know, the boom chuck chuck accompaniment.
But Beethoven elevates it.
He really does. Look at his quintets in C major, Opus 29 from 1801, and the fugue in D major, Opus 137 from 1817. In both of those scores, Beethoven assigns significantly more thematic melodic material to the first viola part than he does to the second violin part.
Take that, second violins. But seriously, reading the alto clef actually allows the viola to bridge the gap between the treble and bass realms. And in his string quartets, he exploits this perfectly.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in the quartet in E minor, Opus 59, number 2, there is the famous theme russe in the Maggiore of the Allegretto. He gives this incredibly complex, rhythmic Russian folk theme directly to the viola.
And then in the harp quartet, Opus 74.
Yes. The solo given to the viola in the second variation of the Allegretto. It is widely considered one of the most inspired lyrical sections in the entire piece. But why was he suddenly writing these incredibly demanding exposed parts?
Because he had a muse.
Ooh, Ooh, tell us about the muse.
His name was Franz Weiss. Weiss lives from 1778 to 1831, and he was, without a doubt, Beethoven's absolute favorite violist.
What ensembles did he play in?
Weiss was the violist for the legendary Razumowski Quartet and later the Chopin Quartet. These were the groups that played most of Beethoven's chamber music directly from his messy, ink-blotted manuscripts.
Often with Beethoven sitting right there in the room, right?
Yeah, shouting instructions before he went entirely deaf. Weiss was an absolute virtuoso. His artistry and his ability to project a massive tone proved to Beethoven that the viola was the technical and expressive equal of the violin.
It's amazing how one specific player's physical ability can permanently alter the course of music history, which makes Beethoven's next piece a bit funny, the so-called eyeglasses duet.
Yes, the sonata in E-flat major, affectionately titled Duett mit zwei obligaten Augenglasen for viola and cello.
Duet with two obligato eyeglasses. The
Yeah.
title alone is brilliant, but it's a bit of a historical fragment, isn't it?
It is. It was written in extreme haste, likely for two amateur musicians, perhaps Beethoven himself and a friend, who both needed reading glasses to see the music.
That's hilarious. So it's not a full sonata?
No, he only ever completed an allegro and a minuetto. If you go to the British Museum in London, you can actually see the manuscript.
What does it look like?
It is fascinating because it's just a mess of rushed ink, and the second movement exists only as a fragmented sketch. But it really shows his enduring affection for the unique acoustic blend of the viola and the cello without any upper treble interference from a violin.
I love that. Well, let's move from Beethoven's incomplete sketches to a piece that causes literal turf wars in music conservatory hallways today.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
I'm talking about Franz Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata.
Ah, yes. This is a fascinating case of musical archaeology. Schubert, who lived from 1797 to 1828, wrote this sonata in 1824 for a completely different, now totally extinct instrument, the Arpeggione.
I want to spend some time on this because the Arpeggione is essentially a musical ghost. What exactly was this thing?
It was invented just 1 year prior to Schubert's composition, so in 1823, by a Viennese luthier named Johann Georg Stauffer.
Okay, so it was a brand new invention. What did it look like?
Physically, it was a bizarre hybrid. It was almost as large as a standard cello, measuring roughly 120 centimeters.
So what is that, about 47 inches tall?
Yeah, roughly 47 inches, depending on the length of the end pin. But it didn't have the sloping shoulders of a cello. It was shaped much more like a guitar, with a flat back and a fretted fingerboard.
Wait, a fretted fingerboard, like with actual metal fret?
Exactly like a guitar.
Yeah.
And it had 6 strings, tuned just like a standard acoustic guitar. E, A, D, G, B, and a high E.
Okay, well, let's just think about the physics and the ergonomics of this for a second. You have a massive 120-centimeter instrument. You are sitting down, holding it between your knees like a cello.
Right.
But you are navigating a wide, flat, fretted fingerboard with 6 strings, and you are trying to bow it with a standard curved bow. It sounds like an ergonomic nightmare.
Oh, it absolutely was.
Bowing across 6 strings without accidentally hitting the wrong one requires an incredibly flat bridge, which makes projecting volume almost impossible.
You've hit on exactly why the instrument died. It was an incredibly niche invention that tried to be 2 things at once and really just failed at both.
Did they even make very many of them?
No, historians actually believe only 2 or 3 of these original instruments were ever even built by Stauffer.
So Schubert writes this gorgeous, melancholic 3-movement sonata, a true masterpiece of Viennese lyricism, for an instrument that essentially goes extinct 5 minutes after he writes it.
Yes. And because the Arpeggione was played between the knees and sat in the tenor register, cellists eventually appropriated the 1824 composition as their own standard repertoire.
Because the 6-string tuning kind of fits nicely into thumb position for them.
Exactly.
But violists play it all the time. We have our own editions, and cellists always give us this side eye, like we stole their property.
But the cellists didn't own it to begin with. Riley's text is very firm on this. Violists have just as much historical and aesthetic claim to its use as cellists do.
Take that, cellists.
Honestly, yes, because the viola is tuned in fifths C, G, D, A, some of the rapid arpeggios that Schubert wrote, which were designed to lay easily across the guitar-like tuning of the Arpeggione, actually lay much more naturally across the higher strings of the viola.
Rather than on the heavy, thick strings of the cello.
Exactly. It is a beautiful work, and it is now entirely entrenched as an indispensable part of the viola's borrowed repertoire.
I love that justification. The Arpeggione died, its house is abandoned, so it's free real estate.
Exactly.
Now, to close out this section on borrowed works, we really have to talk about Johannes Brahms and his two clarinet sonatas.
Oh, Brahms is an absolute titan of our repertoire. He composed two sonatas for clarinet and piano in F minor and in E-flat major, Opus 120, in 1894.
And these were definitely written for a clarinetist, right?
They were undoubtedly inspired by and written for a specific virtuoso clarinetist named Richard Mühlfeld.
Here is where I want to push back and where I think students really need to pay attention. A clarinet is a wind instrument. It produces sound through a vibrating reed and human breath.
It's a completely different mechanism.
Exactly. It has a completely different mechanism for phrasing. It requires actual lung capacity. And acoustically, a clarinet produces sound using primarily odd-numbered harmonics. A viola is a bowed string instrument.
We have full, rich, even, and odd harmonics.
Right. The friction of the bow creates a completely different attack and decay. You can't just take clarinet sheet music, throw an alto clef on it, and expect it to work.
You are 100% correct, and Brahms knew that. That is the brilliant part of this story. You don't just take the clarinet sheet music. Brahms himself made the alterations.
Oh, really?
Yes. Brahms created the original viola editions of these sonatas right alongside the clarinet versions. He intimately understood the physics of the string instrument, and he fundamentally rewrote portions of the music to fit the unique sonority of the viola.
So if I have the clarinet score and the viola score open side by side, what specific changes am I looking at?
You're looking at primarily two major architectural shifts. First, Brahms added double stops.
Because a clarinet is a monophonic instrument, it can only play one note at a time.
Exactly. But a viola can play 2, 3, or 4 notes simultaneously. So Brahms added rich double stops to the viola part to thicken the harmonic texture and utilize the sympathetic resonance of the string instrument.
That makes total sense. And the second change?
Second, and more importantly, he changed the registers by an octave in several key passages.
Let's explain why that matters. The clarinet has this beautiful, piercing high register, the altissimo. But on a viola, playing way up high on the A string can sometimes sound a bit thin compared to a violin.
Precisely. Brahms realized that the true power of the viola lies in its lower strings, the dark, reedy C and G strings. So he dropped many of the melodic lines down an octave to force the violist to dig into the C string, which completely changes the emotional weight of the phrase.
That's amazing.
And furthermore, he actually rewrote the chord structures in the piano accompaniment in those sections, shifting the piano's voicing so it wouldn't swallow the viola's low frequencies.
That is true compositional genius. He isn't arranging, he is translating the music into a totally new language.
Exactly. And Riley notes that it is incredibly unfortunate that many modern publishers of these works cut corners and print the clarinet part in the piano score of the viola editions.
Oh, I've seen that. It causes massive confusion in rehearsals when the pianist says, wait, why are you playing down an octave?
But Brahms abetted and approved every single one of those octave drops. Violists need not apologize for playing these sonatas.
He practically gift-wrapped them for us, and we know he loved the viola just looking at his chamber music.
His chamber works are a masterclass in exploiting the viola's color. The two quintets, Opus 88 and Opus 111, the sextets, Opus 18 and Opus 36, the quartets, Opus 51.
So much good stuff.
But the absolute crown jewel is his quartet in B-flat major, Opus 67.
Ooh, the third movement of Opus 67. If you are a chamber violist, this is the moment you live for.
The third movement, marked agitato, allegretto non troppo, in 34 time. Brahms does something texturally revolutionary here.
The main breathless theme is introduced immediately by the viola, right?
Yes. But to ensure the viola cuts through the dense acoustic texture of the ensemble, Brahms specifically directs the two violins and the cello to play consordino with mutes throughout the entire movement, while the viola remains unmuted.
Let's talk about how mutes actually work for our listeners who might not be string players. When a violinist puts a heavy piece of ebony or rubber on their bridge, it physically clamps down on the wood.
It restricts the vibrations.
Right. It prevents the higher frequency overtones from traveling from the string into the body of the instrument. It creates this dampened, distant, hazy sound.
Yes, exactly.
So you have three instruments playing in this hazy, muted fog, and right in the middle, the unmuted viola is just tearing through the texture with full, raw, unfiltered resonance.
It's like putting a theatrical spotlight directly on the viola while dimming all the other lights on the stage. The contrast creates this incredible, husky, urgent sound. It is absolute proof of his profound understanding of the instrument's capabilities.
Wow. So we've seen how violists essentially scavenge the clarinet and their arpeggione to build their repertoire, but they didn't always have to steal.
No, not always.
Sometimes original masterworks were handed to them directly, though. In the case of Brahms, it came wrapped in some incredibly messy domestic drama.
Oh, the drama is real.
We are moving into a deeply personal space now. Let's talk about Brahms's Op. 91.
Yes, the Zwei Lieder for alt, bratsche, and piano two songs for contralto, viola, and piano Opus 91. The songs are Gestillte Sehnsucht, which means appeased desire, and Geistliches Wiegenlied, the sacred lullaby.
The history behind this is straight out of a soap opera. Brahms started writing these in 1863 for a very specific couple.
He did. Brahms was a great admirer of Amalie Joachim, a celebrated operatic contralto, and she was married to Brahms's dearest friend and closest musical collaborator, the legendary violin virtuoso Joseph Joachim.
And Joseph was a great violinist too, wasn't he?
He was. Aside from being the premier violinist of his age, he was a phenomenal violist. Brahms envisioned these songs as a beautiful family portrait. Emily singing, her husband Joseph accompanying her on the viola, and Brahms himself playing the piano.
It sounds totally idyllic, except the Joachim household was a complete disaster behind closed doors.
It was completely falling apart. Joseph was intensely, irrationally jealous, and Emily was deeply unhappy. The tension festered for years, completely unbeknownst to Brahms, until the Joachims finally went through a highly public, bitter divorce in 1881.
And Brahms, who just wanted to write a nice lullaby for his friends, gets dragged right into the middle of the wreckage.
He was devastated. When the news of their divorce reached him in 1881, Brahms was so profoundly shocked and so sympathetic to Amelie's plight that he actually sided with her.
Wow, against his best friend.
Yes. He wrote a letter defending Amelie, which was later used in the divorce proceedings against Joseph. Because of this, Brahms completely severed communication with Joseph Joachim for several months.
He blew up his most important professional relationship over this divorce. And what happened to the sheet music?
Well, Brahms was in such deep personal distress that he locked the manuscripts away and delayed the publication of these two songs until 1884.
So they just sat in a drawer for years.
Exactly. Now, when they were finally published, the publisher insisted on including an alternate cello part to boost sales. But as Carl Geringer, the brilliant Brahms scholar, has noted, there is absolutely no doubt that Brahms composed this specifically for the viola.
Let's look at the actual music, because it is heavily layered with subtext. Let's look at the second song, Geistliches Wiegenlied, the sacred lullaby.
Geringer points out that Brahms uses an ancient contrapuntal technique here called canto fermo, a fixed melody. Brahms takes a very old, traditional German cradle song called Joseph, Lieber Joseph, mein blessed Joseph, Joseph die.
Wait, stop. The song is literally called Joseph, Dear Joseph, and he is writing it for Joseph Joachim to play on the viola to his wife. That is painfully on the nose.
It is intensely intimate, almost uncomfortably so. Brahms gives this old, grounded melody entirely to the viola. The viola plays this slow, ancient lullaby on the thick C and G strings, acting as the foundation of the earth.
And the vocalist.
While the viola plays that, the contralto voice contributes these gentle, floating, original melodies over the top of it.
Acoustically, blending a human contralto voice with an alto string instrument is dangerous. They sit in the exact same frequency range. They should clash.
But they don't, because of how Brahms spaces the chords in the piano and how he articulates the viola's bowing. Geringer notes this song is significant not just for its peculiar color effects, blending the dark human voice with the dark string voice, but for its profound emotional weight.
And the first song, Gestillte Sehnsucht, is just as masterful.
Oh, absolutely. That one expresses Brahms' deep love of nature. Geringer asks, how delicately is the soughing of the wind portrayed by the broken chords gliding across the strings of the viola?
I can hear it now.
Brahms requires the violist to play these sweeping, arpeggiated figures that mimic the rustling of leaves, creating a physical atmosphere in the room.
It's an absolute masterpiece of texture. But speaking of masterpieces and massive egos, we have to move on to what is arguably the most famous original viola piece of the 19th century, Hector Berlioz's Symphony, Harold in Italy, composed in 1834.
If Brahms was a quiet domestic tragedy, Berlioz is a massive, explosive, international blockbuster. This piece has probably been performed more times with full orchestra than any other composition written for the viola.
And the story of its creation is legendary. Set the scene for us. How does a wildly eccentric French composer end up writing an Italian-themed symphony for a solo viola?
It starts a year before the premiere, in 1833, with a completely different eccentric genius, The Italian violin virtuoso, Niccolo Paganini.
Oh, here we go.
Right. Paganini was sitting in the audience at the premiere of Berlioz's overture to King Lear. Paganini was so utterly captivated by Berlioz's wild, colorful orchestration that he visited him a few weeks later with a very specific and highly lucrative request.
What did he want?
Paganini told Berlioz, "I have acquired a marvelous Stradivarius viola, and I want to play it in public."
I want to pause on the instrument itself. A Stradivarius viola is the holy grail. Antonio Stradivari made hundreds of violins, but he made very, very few violas.
They are incredibly rare.
The one Paganini likely acquired is known today as the Paganini Quartet Stradivarius, or the Medici. It is massive. The back length is 41.5 centimeters.
Which is over 16.25 inches.
That is a gigantic piece of wood to hold under your chin. It would have produced a sound like an absolute cannon. So Paganini has this incredible instrument, and he says to Berlioz, "You are the only one I would trust to write for it."
But Berlioz was terrified. He replied that his own knowledge of the viola's technical capabilities was simply not sufficient to compose a work that would challenge the terrifying virtuosity of an artist like Paganini.
But Paganini wouldn't take no for an answer, right?
Exactly. Paganini was adamant. He said, no, I insist you will manage. I can't possibly do it. I am too ill to compose.
So Berlioz accepts the commission, but he doesn't start by writing an Italian travelogue.
No, his original plan was to write a dark, dramatic fantasy for orchestra, chorus, and viola solo. The original working title was The Dernier Instant de Marie Stuart, The Last Moments of Mary Stuart.
A symphony about a Scottish queen getting beheaded. Very Berlioz.
Right.
So what happened to that idea?
Berlioz enthusiastically completed the first movement, and Paganini requested to see the score. Paganini looked at the manuscript, and to his absolute dismay, he saw that there were many long rests in the solo viola part where the orchestra was simply developing the themes.
Oh.
He expressed his extreme displeasure to Berlioz, famously complaining, "There is not enough for me to do here. I should be playing all the time."
I should be playing all the time. That is the most stereotypical, egotistical soloist complaint I have ever heard in my life. He didn't want a piece of music. He wanted a 45-minute technical exercise to show off his left hand.
Exactly. Berlioz, completely deflated, agreed with him, but firmly told Paganini that a superficial showpiece like that could only be written by Paganini himself.
Good for Berlioz.
Disappointed and suffering from his severe throat illness, Paganini took his massive Stradivarius and left Paris for Nice.
But Paganini walking away was actually the greatest gift Berlioz could have received.
Absolutely. Freed from the oppressive pressure of pleasing Paganini's ego, Berlioz completely threw out the Mary Stuart concept and expanded his vision. He turned to an incredibly popular, sweeping autobiographical poem by Lord Byron, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage.
Byron, the original romantic bad boy.
Berlioz combined the dramatic impressions of Byron's poem with experiences from his own wild travels wandering to the mountains of Italy. He decided to compose a series of orchestral scenes where the solo viola would act as an actual person, a melancholic dreamer wandering through the varied scenes of life.
It's a great concept.
And the title, Harold in Italy, actually only covers the Italian canto of Byron's massive poem.
Let's break down the structure of this for our Viola Studio listeners, because understanding the architecture of these movements is vital if you ever have to perform this or play the orchestral reduction. There are 4 movements.
Yes, and each is highly programmatic. Movement 1 is Harold in the Mountains, scenes of melancholy, happiness, and joy. Movement 2 is the famous March of the Pilgrims singing an evening prayer.
And the 3rd.
Movement 3 is the Serenade of an Abruzzi mountaineer to his mistress. And movement 4 is the explosive, terrifying Orgy of the Brigands, with recollections of themes from the preceding movements.
Berlioz never did anything halfway. An orgy of the brigands. And musically, to tie all this together, he brings back a psychological technique he invented in his Symphonie Fantastique, right? The idée fixe.
The idée fixe, or fixed idea. It is a recurring principal musical theme that represents the literal character of Harold. It is played by the solo viola, and it is established in the first movement and then repeated throughout the entire composition.
I'm looking at the score now. When the viola plays the idée fixe, it is this beautiful, lingering, mournful melody. But in the Symphonie Fantastique, the idée fixe constantly mutates and violently interrupts the orchestra. How does Berlioz handle it here with the viola? If the full brass section is blaring, how does the viola survive?
That is the genius of Berlioz's orchestration. He realized the viola couldn't fight a brass section, so he sought to superimpose the theme.
How does that work?
He weaves the viola in so that it doesn't alter or interrupt the complex orchestral development happening around it. The viola floats above the texture, playing its melancholic song, entirely detached from the chaos of the orchestra. The viola is a passive, poetic observer.
That is brilliant. So the piece is finished. It's a masterpiece of orchestration. We get to the premiere on November 23rd, 1834, at the Paris Conservatoire. Who played the viola since Paganini bailed?
The soloist was a phenomenal player named Chrétien Orhan. He played a massive, beautiful viola, and he was known for his deeply religious, austere personality, which fit the character of Harold perfectly.
But the premiere didn't go smoothly, did it?
It was a near disaster. The conductor was Narcisse Girard, and he completely misunderstood the complex rhythmic pacing of the score. There were significant tempo problems during the performance, and Berlioz was pulling his hair out in the audience.
But the audience loved it anyway.
They were enthralled by the colors. Even with Girard's conducting errors, the second movement, the March of the Pilgrims, was so popular it had to be repeated as an encore, right then and there. And over the next 4 years, Harold was performed constantly across Europe.
Wait, I have to know. Did Paganini, who was notoriously stingy and fiercely critical, ever actually hear the piece he commissioned and then abandoned?
He did, but he waited 4 years. On December 16, 1838, Paganini was back in Paris. Berlioz was conducting a massive concert at the Conservatoire featuring both the Symphonie Fantastique and Harold en Italie.
And Berlioz was sick, wasn't he?
Berlioz was actually in incredibly poor health at the time, suffering from severe bronchitis, and was physically exhausted after conducting the massive orchestra.
And Paganini goes backstage.
Yes, accompanied by his young son, Achille. Now, Paganini's throat disease had progressed so far that he was completely unable to speak above the whisper. So Paganini whispered into his son's ear, and Achille relayed the message to Berlioz.
What did he say?
Achille told Berlioz that his father had never before been so deeply emotionally affected by a piece of music, and that it was all his father could do to keep from kneeling in the concert hall. And then, right there in the green room, the great Paganini actually knelt down and kissed Berlioz's hand in appreciation.
Wow.
Berlioz was so flustered he couldn't even speak.
The god of the violin kneeling before a composer because of a viola symphony. But Paganini didn't just give him a compliment, right? He famously refused to pay for his own doctors, but he opened his wallet for Berlioz.
2 days later, Achille visited Berlioz's apartment. Berlioz was now shivering, sick in bed. Achille delivered a letter from Paganini.
What was in the letter?
The letter read, "Beethoven being dead, only Berlioz can make him live again. And I, who have heard your divine composition so worthy of the genius you are, humbly beg you to accept, as token of my homage, 20,000 francs, which Baron de Rothschild will remit to you on your presenting the enclosed letter."
20,000 francs in 1838. To put that in perspective for our listeners, that is roughly equivalent to several years' salary for a prosperous professional. That is a life-changing amount of money.
It literally saved Berlioz's life and career. Despite his obvious genius, his compositions required such massive orchestras that they had never made him much money. He was drowning in debt.
So this was a lifeline.
This gift allowed him to satisfy his creditors and gave him a handsome sum to live on so he could write his next symphony, Romeo et Juliet. And Harold and Italy immediately joined the ranks of the truly outstanding compositions in Western music history.
And a quick pedagogical tip for the students listening. If you want to study Harold, but you don't have a 90-piece orchestra handy, Franz Liszt actually transcribed the massive orchestral score into a brilliant piano reduction in 1836. It is a beast for the pianist, but it makes the piece accessible for recitals.
It's a great arrangement to study from.
All right, we have covered the monumental Harold, so let's move forward. We're looking at the heavyweights who wrote specifically and originally for the viola, pushing its technical boundaries right up to the dawn of the 20th century. Let's start with the early to mid-Romantics.
We must begin with Felix Mendelssohn, who lived from 1809 to 1847. We all know Mendelssohn as a legendary piano prodigy and the composer of the violin concerto. But Mendelssohn played the viola with an astonishing level of skill.
Really?
Oh, yes. He frequently performed chamber music with luminaries like Niels Gade, Ferdinand David, and yes, even Paganini.
Hold on. Mendelssohn played chamber music with Paganini. With Mendelssohn on the viola and Paganini on the violin. I would pay any amount of money to hear what that sounded like.
It proves that Mendelssohn wasn't just a composer who occasionally held a viola. He was a true practitioner. And that physical understanding of the instrument translated directly into his writing. He composed a sonata in C minor for viola and piano between 1823 and 1824.
Wait. 1823. Mendelssohn was born in 1809. He was 14 or 15 years old when he wrote a full multi-movement viola sonata. I was struggling to play 2-octave scales in tune when I was 15.
His genius was fully formed incredibly early. It's a wonderful classical-leaning sonata, but his mature chamber music also includes fantastic, rigorous parts for the viola, particularly the quintet in A major, Opus 18, and the quintet in B-flat major, Opus 87.
And what about his symphonies?
If you look at his orchestral works, a perfect example is the second movement of his famous Italian symphony. He strips away the violins and assigns the primary chanting thematic material directly to the viola section.
Let's talk about Robert Schumann. Because if Mendelssohn represents the classical elegance of the Romantic era, Schumann represents the raw psychological intensity. His viola music is incredibly evocative.
Schumann, living from 1810 to 1856, gave us one of the absolute pillars of our repertoire, the Merchant Builder, or Fairyland Pictures, for viola and piano, Opus 131. He wrote this in 1851.
Oh, I love the Merchant Builder.
It is a set of 4 distinct character pieces dedicated to Joseph W. von Wasilewski, who was a concertmaster and later the conductor of the Düsseldorf Orchestra. The first performance was actually given by Wasilewski playing the viola with Clara Schumann, Robert's brilliant wife, on the piano.
The Merchant Builder is standard repertoire now. I remember grinding away at the intense string crossings in the third movement. But he wrote another piece right at the end of his life that carries a much darker psychological weight, didn't he?
Yes. From a violist's perspective, his most emotionally devastating chamber writing is in the Märchenerzählungen, or fairy stories, for clarinet, viola, and piano, Opus 132. He wrote this in 1853.
And 1853 is a terrifying year in Schumann's biography.
Exactly. He composed this just 4 months before his severe mental breakdown, which resulted in him throwing himself into the freezing Rhine River in a suicide attempt, and his subsequent commitment to an insane asylum for the rest of his life.
When you listen to Opus 132, you can hear the fraying edges of his mind. The viola part is filled with these obsessive, repetitive, rhythmic motifs and sudden, jarring harmonic shifts. It's amazing how much raw human fragility is locked into the ink of these scores.
The dark tone of the viola was the perfect vehicle for his despair.
Who else from that early era should we look at?
We must mention Carl Maria von Weber. He received early musical instruction from his older stepbrother Fritz von Weber, who was a professional violist. In 1809, Carl Maria composed the brilliant Andante and Rondo Ungherese for viola and piano specifically for Fritz.
And Fritz kept it to himself for a while, didn't he?
Fritz apparently loved it so much he kept the manuscript for his own exclusive use for a while, refusing to let anyone else play it. Carl Maria eventually got frustrated and had the same work published in 1813, but arranged for the bassoon and piano just so it would get out into the world.
That's hilarious, so we have to steal it back from the bassoonists.
Today, the original viola version is available in several excellent editions, and the rondo section is a fantastic, fiery showpiece, utilizing complex, subtle bowing. Fritz's high confidence on the viola also likely influenced Carl Maria to write the famous, incredibly difficult solo viola obbligato to Aeschylus' Romanz und Ari in the third act of his opera Der Freischütz.
I love how family ties shape the repertoire. Any other mid-century heavyweights?
Johann Nepomuk Hummel is crucial. Though maybe not considered a composer of the absolute first magnitude like Beethoven today, he was a real champion of the viola, bridging the classical and romantic styles.
What did he write for us?
He wrote a lovely sonata in E-flat major for viola and piano, as well as a highly technical potpourri for viola and orchestra, Opus 94. His chamber music, like his celebrated septet in D minor, assigns a major share of the demanding thematic material to the viola.
And we also have to mention Glinka, right?
Yes, Nikol Glinka, the pioneer Russian national composer. He played both viola and piano and wrote an unfinished sonata in D minor for viola and piano between 1825 and 1828.
Russian Melancholy, played on a viola, is a match made in heaven.
It truly is. The piece is wonderful, and it is now widely available in a brilliant edition prepared by the great mid-20th century Soviet violist Vadim Borsovsky, who completed the fragmented second movement.
All right, let's look at the bridge. The late Romantics who started pushing us, both harmonically and technically, into the 20th century. When I think of dense, brutally challenging late Romantic string writing, I immediately think of Max Reger.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
Reger lived from 1873 to 1916, and he composed works of immense importance and immense difficulty for the viola. He wrote a massive sonata in B-flat major for viola and piano around 1900, published in 1909.
But the real test is his solo works.
Yes, for the teachers and students listening, the true test of your pedagogical mettle are his Drei Suiten for bratsche Allein, 3 suites for solo viola, Opus 131, composed in 1916, right at the end of his life.
These 3 suites are basically the late Romantic era's answer to the Bach cello suites. Riley's book says they are of moderate difficulty, but honestly, I think any student who has tried to play the G minor suite will tell you Riley is understating it. What makes them so physically demanding?
They are incredibly demanding. Reger's harmonic language is dense and highly chromatic. To achieve this on a solo instrument, he writes pages and pages of complex double, triple, and quadruple stops.
Let's translate that for a second. Playing a four-note chord on a viola requires you to contort your left hand into these agonizingly unnatural frames. You're stretching your pinky to the C string while keeping your index finger curled on the A string, and you have to play it perfectly in tune.
And not just in first position. The range of these suites occasionally pushes quite high. You have to be very comfortable reading beyond the alto clef up into the treble clef, navigating complex shifting in the higher positions while maintaining those double stops.
It's a workout.
They require an incredibly strong left hand and immense bow control to keep the chords from sounding crushed. They force students completely out of their safe, classical-era habits.
If Reger pushes our left-hand technique to the breaking point, our next composer, Richard Strauss, pushes our tuning pegs. Let's talk about his symphonic poem Don Quixote from 1897.
Don Quixote is a fascinating piece of orchestral storytelling. The main character, Don Quixote, is represented by a highly featured solo cello. The cellist gets top billing on the program, featured almost exactly like a concerto soloist.
But what about Sancho Panza?
Yes. Less important historically, yet musically absolutely essential to the performance, is the theme for Quixote's bumbling squire, Sancho Panza. And Strauss assigned Sancho Panza exclusively to the solo principal violist.
And this theme has a very specific, very strange technical requirement for the violist: scordatura tuning. For those who aren't familiar, scordatura is when you deliberately tune a string on your instrument to a different pitch than its standard tuning.
It's a really cool effect.
In modern terms, that's like a heavy metal guitarist taking their low E string and dropping it down to a low D so they can play a much chunkier, heavier, darker riff.
That is a perfect acoustic analogy.
Mm-hmm.
In the third variation of the piece, which portrays Sancho Panza's endless chattering, his grounded peasant nature, and his peculiarities of speech, the solo violist must physically reach up and tune their lowest string, the C string, down a half step to a low B.
What does that actually do to the physical physics of the instrument? Why not just have them play a B on a cello?
Because it changes the entire character of the instrument. It does two things. First, it gives the violist access to that low B, expanding the range downward just for that section.
Right.
But more importantly, by loosening the tension on that thickest, heaviest string, it alters the resonance of the entire wooden body of the viol. The C string becomes slightly floppier. It loses some of its focused core and produces a darker, growlier, more rustic, almost comical tone. It perfectly encapsulates the unrefined, earthy character of Sancho Panza. It's a brilliant theatrical device.
And it was taken very seriously. In early 20th century, you didn't just have the principal violist play it from their seat in the orchestra.
No, legendary string soloists like Pablo Casals on cello and Lionel Tertis on viola were frequently hired together to stand at the front of the stage as dual soloists when this work was performed.
Lionel Tertis playing a growling Sancho Panza on a detuned viola. What an absolute wall of sound that must have been. To round out the heavyweights, we shouldn't forget Max Bruch.
Bruch remained a staunch, unapologetic romanticist, even as the musical idiom around him was fracturing into modernism. Between 1910 and 1913, he composed 10 pieces of particular importance to our repertoire.
What are the highlights?
He wrote the 8 pieces for clarinet, viola, and piano, Opus 83 in 1910. These are beautiful, highly evocative single-movement works. 7 of the 8 pieces are cast in minor keys, giving them a very dark, brooding, autumnal quality that perfectly suits the viola. He also wrote a romance in F major for viola and orchestra, Opus 85 in 1911, and a fantastic concerto in E minor for clarinet, viola, and orchestra, Opus 88 in 1913.
Okay, we are entering the final phase of our mission. We've talked about Beethoven, Brahms, and Berlioz, the household names. But for the Viola Studio listener looking for fresh recital material stuff that the jury or the audience hasn't heard 100 times, let's look at the hidden gems.
The list of lesser-known romantics is surprisingly deep, and the music is of very high quality. Charles Valentin Alcan, the fiercely difficult French pianist, wrote a sonata concert, Opus 47 in 1857.
And there's a viola edition of that.
Yes, the separate viola edition was edited by L. Casimir Ney and requires immense virtuosity. Then there's Robert Fuchs, an Austrian composer who's highly regarded by Brahms himself, who wrote a fantastic sonata in D minor, Opus 86, around 1909. It uses the C string aggressively and features complex, driving bowing patterns.
Who else?
Heinrich von Herzogenberg dedicated his legend in Opus 62, a set of 3 pieces, to Joseph Joachim. George Onslow wrote a sonata in C minor, Opus 16, number 2, around 1820. And Karl Reinecke, who was very fond of the viola's tone, wrote a sonata in A minor, Opus 42, and the beautiful Fantastuca, Opus 43, around 1857.
I want to pause on one specific hidden gem that I think every advanced student should look up immediately. Friedrich Kiel. He wrote a sonata in G minor, Opus 67, and 3 romances, Opus 69. Why should we care about Friedrich Kiel?
You should care because of the sheer, uncompromising quality of the counterpoint in the interplay between the viola and the piano. To give you some context, Harold Truscott, a highly respected British musicologist, gave a lecture at the 6th Viola Congress in London in 1978.
What did he say about Kiel?
He spent a significant amount of time analyzing Kiel's 3 romances, and he concluded with this statement: "The writing is superb for both instruments, separately and as a team, and the whole is a work worthy of any violist's while to master."
Wow, that's high praise.
This is top-tier chamber music that has simply fallen out of fashion. It isn't easy, but it is waiting in the archives to be rediscovered.
Excellent. And now, the final category, the virtuoso double agents. The famous 19th century violinists who secretly loved the darker strings and wrote heavily for the viola. We already mentioned Joseph Joachim in the messy Brahms divorce drama, but he was a highly capable composer himself, right?
Yes, though his compositional output is often unfairly overshadowed by his friendship with Brahms. Joachim wrote 2 very significant, highly romantic works for viola. The first is the Hebrew Melodies for Viola and Piano, Opus 9, composed around 1851. It is a set of 3 deeply expressive pieces based on his impressions of Lord Byron's poems.
And the second work.
He also wrote the Variations for Viola and Piano, Opus 10, around 1852.
I've looked at the Opus 10 variations. It features 10 distinct variations and a massive extended coda on his own original theme. It requires blistering left-hand speed.
It was written by a virtuoso for a virtuoso, which brings us back to Paganini.
Aside from rejecting Berlioz's Harold in Italy for having too many rests, did Paganini actually sit down and write anything for the viola himself?
He did. His obsession with the instrument really peaked between 1833 and 1834 after he acquired that massive Stradivarius. In 1834, the exact same year Harold premiered in Paris, Paganini composed his own sonata per la grande viola et orchestra in E minor, Opus 35.
A grande viola. What does that mean? Was it just a physically big instrument?
It refers to both the physical size of his Stradivarius, which, as we discussed, was over 16 inches, but also the grand, heroic style of the writing. Paganini actually premiered this work himself in London in 1834.
I bet that was a spectacle.
Oh, it is filled with left-hand pizzicato, blazing harmonics, and tense everything you expect from Paganini, but translated to the thicker strings of the viola. He also wrote a trio for viola, guitar, and cello, Opus 68, and a serenade for the same bizarre instrumentation, Opus 69.
A viola, guitar, and cello trio. That sounds like a remarkably fun chamber reading session, but there is another Italian violinist we absolutely need to discuss, and for the teachers listening, grab a pen. Alessandro Rolla.
Alessandro Rolla is a staggering, monumental figure in this history. He lived from 1757 to 1841. He was an Italian violinist, violist, composer, conductor, and most importantly, an incredibly influential teacher.
Why did he write so much?
Because he was a performing virtuoso on both the violin and the viola, he constantly needed fresh music to demonstrate his skill and to teach his students, so he just wrote an amazing amount of it himself.
How much is an amazing amount?
Out of a total output of over 400 compositions, Rolla wrote 60 violin-viola duets, 33 trios for 2 violins and viola, and 20 trios for violin, viola, and cello.
Over 400 compositions. That is a pedagogical goldmine. Did he write anything for viola with a full orchestra?
He wrote no fewer than 12 works for solo viola and orchestra. 9 of those are full multi-movement concertos.
9 concertos?
Yes. The other 3 are titled Adagio e tema con variazioni, Rondo, and Divertimento.
So for a teacher looking to transition a student out of the standard Telemann or J.C. Bach concertos, Rolla is the absolute answer. What specifically should they look for to build technique?
Rolla was the professor of violin and viola at the Milano Conservatory. He knew exactly how to build a player's physical apparatus. He wrote dozens of method books, etudes, and caprices.
Any specific pieces?
Specifically, look for a set entitled Tre pezzi per viola sola, 3 pieces for solo viola. These are artist-level pieces taken from his larger esercizios, and they are absolutely perfect for a teacher to use as advanced bowing assignments.
What do they focus on?
They force the student to master rapid string crossings and off-the-string spiccato bowing on the heavier, less responsive C and G strings. They are also incredibly musical, making them perfect for a student to program on a challenging university recital.
Incredible. Let's finish this virtuoso list with two heavy hitters, Ludwig Spohr and Henri Viton.
Ludwig Spohr was a highly prominent German violinist and conductor. His major contribution to our world is the grand duo in E minor for violin and viola, Opus 13. Riley makes a very bold claim in the text. He notes this work must be included right alongside the famous Mozart duets as being among the finest, most perfectly balanced works ever written for the exposed violin-viola combination.
And Viton.
As for Henri Viton, born in Belgium in 1820, he was considered one of the greatest violinists of his time, but he harbored a deep, abiding love for playing the inner voices on the viola in string quartets.
And he didn't just play any standard factory viola.
No, Viton's owned a magnificent Gasparo da Sala viola.
Let's talk about Gasparo da Sala because this is crucial to understanding the sound of this music. Gasparo was making instruments in Brescia, Italy in the late 1500s, long before Stradivari. If a Stradivarius violin sounds like a focused laser beam that cuts right through an orchestra, a Gasparo da Sala viola sounds like a physical weight.
It has a very specific tone.
It has this massive, dark, brooding, booming sound. It's like dropping a heavy oak table on a wooden floor. It physically moves the air in the room. It makes perfect sense that a virtuoso like Vitom's would want to write music that exploits that specific ancient tonal depth.
Exactly. The instrument dictates the composition. Viton wrote 3 major compositions explicitly for the deep resonance of that Gasparo da Sala.
Which ones?
A highly technical capriccio in C minor for viola alone, the mournful elegy for viola and piano, Opus 30 from 1854, and the very consequential sprawling sonata in B-flat major for viola and piano, Opus 36 from 1863.
The sonata is a beast.
The sonata in particular requires the player to dig into the strings with massive bow weight to achieve the sonority Vitom's was hearing in his head.
So we've covered a staggering amount of ground today. What does this all mean? Let's synthesize this journey. We started by dismantling a stubborn historical myth.
The myth of the missing romantic viola.
Exactly. We saw a teenage Beethoven sitting in a court orchestra, absorbing the physical reality of the viola's potential, and later giving it masterclasses in chamber music independence with his Opus 59 quartets. We saw Schubert writing an arpeggiated masterpiece for the doomed fretted Arpeggione, which violists have rightfully claimed as a borrowed treasure because it perfectly fits our tuning.
And we watched the bitter, tragic divorce of the Joachims' birth, the profound canto fermo of Brahms' Opus 91, blending the human contralto with the alto string.
We saw Paganini's massive ego accidentally birth Berlioz's symphonic masterpiece, Harold in Italy, where the viola acts as a poetic observer rather than a flashy acrobat. And finally, we uncovered a mountain of pedagogical and recital gold from Rolla's 400 pieces, Reger's brutal solo suites, and a host of hidden romantics like Friedrich Kiel.
To put it simply, the assumption that there is no romantic viola literature is demonstrably mathematically false.
Completely false.
As Maurice Riley points out in the conclusion of Chapter X, if you look at Franz Zeiringer's massive catalog, Literature for Viola, the incredible list of compositions we discussed in deep detail today constitutes only a microscopic fraction of the total output of works written for the viola by romantic composers.
That's wild to think about.
Not every single piece from that era is a flawless Beethoven-level masterpiece, but there is a massive, historically rich, and physically challenging repertoire waiting for today's violists to explore, study, and perform.
It is time for us to stop complaining about a lack of music and go digging in the archives. Which leads me to a lingering question for you, our Viola Studio listener, to mull over in the practice room today.
A bit of homework.
Yeah. Think about Schubert's Arpeggione. It was a bizarre 120-centimeter, 6-stringed, fretted experiment that went extinct almost immediately. But because it died, it left its absolute masterpiece entirely up for grabs, eventually claimed by both the cello and the viola.
It makes you wonder.
It does. So what other obscure, lost instruments from musical history have incredible, forgotten repertoire that modern violists could justifiably borrow today?
Thank you for joining us, and we hope this summary and analysis have been of great help to you. Please remember that this is only a summary and can never replace the book itself. Therefore, We invite you to truly immerse yourself in the work by reading the original text. If this content was useful to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. Remember, you can share this video with your friends to help our community continue to grow. Warmest regards, and remember, there is always time to learn and explore the world of classical music. A Viola studio production.